Hello, everyone, and welcome to Finding Your Creative Voice. My name is Susie deVille. I'm the founder and CEO of the Innovation and Creativity Institute, and I help entrepreneurs and executives work less and earn more by tapping into the power of their innate creativity. And we are all so fortunate to have the brilliant, the elegant, the worldly, the intellectually curious Constance Klein with us today to talk about how she found her creative voice. Welcome, Constance.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
Woohoo!
Yay.
I want to start by reading Constance's bio because I don't want to miss a morsel of this. You will all greatly appreciate this very interesting background. Constance Klein is a bright light with a colorful past. She grew up in St. Louis and, after barely graduating from college, took off for Europe, where she lived and worked for 20 years. After an overdue divorce, 9/11, and a hard earned sabbatical year, Constance finally realized it was time to return home. In New York City, she reinvented herself as a headhunter in the luxury fashion and lifestyle space and built and led her own firm, Scout Talent. Her client list included legendary global brands, including Chanel, Harrods, Zegna, Coach, Louis Vuitton, and many others. In her current iteration, Constance is the creator, producer, and host of the Dear Constance podcast, in which she shares brief musings from her heart, peppered with anecdotes from her experience interviewing over 1,000 executives in her recruiting days. So, once again, Constance, thank you so much for being here today. I want to start with something that I
It
realized.
exhausts me to hear you say I interviewed over 1,000 people because that's true.
Oh. I want to start with a trip down memory lane, if you will indulge me. I don't know if you know that we are 2 days away from the 7th anniversary of our meeting one another.
No, I didn't know.
We met on February 10th in a loft in Soho, and we were gathered together as part of an incredible intensive with the creatively fabulous Jonathan Fields and a group of entrepreneurs and creators who were all striving to really be able to articulate our passions and our messaging and get it out to the world. And what I remember so well, with so much love and admiration, was we went around the room and Jonathan had asked us to introduce ourselves. And I'm sitting across from you in the room, and he came to you, and as you spoke, your voice cracked. And I fell in love with you immediately because you voiced the vulnerability and the passion that you felt simultaneously. And it was exactly how I felt. And I didn't know at the time that you were a fabulous believing mirror, but that was exactly what I felt in that moment. And I was just so excited to get to know you better from that point on.
Mhm.
So I want to begin with asking you to take us through this process of how you actually began your podcast and how you blended in these incredible different experiences of your life and made what is a very elegant short form podcast.
Thank you. It's a long story, and so interrupt me at any time, but I want to start with there because I think that I was still gripping and I wanted to find my voice in a way. Like you said before, I ran a very successful international executive search firm, And I was longing, I was in that phase of longing for something different. And I did a long coaching course, and I just started exploring and going to different conferences. But the funny thing about that particular event was that I went thinking that I was going to take my experience as a talent scout, an international recruiter, and create an online business for young people. So I was going to go away from the corporate world and try to serve young people who were trying to find their way, which interestingly enough, I would have been serving, my old self. And during the course of that mastermind that we did together, I confessed to my then partner that I actually hated the idea. So I went in and I wrote all of the prep forms to be accepted to this program around this idea. And, day 2, I'm like, I hate my idea. So that was the beginning. I think it was really an important part of the beginning, because I had found my way into groups and into the power of surrounding yourself with like-minded people, and, people that are aligned in terms of whatever project you're working on, whether it's writing or whatever project you're working on. I find that when you align, or when you surround yourself with people that are on that same path, it's very empowering. Anyway, to make a long story short, that was the beginning, I would say. And I mean, I had bought all the equipment. My ex was a photographer. I was trying to video myself, and it was just, I was choked. And you happen to mention the tears. That's always been a big issue for me. I cry and I get emotional immediately, and then I come into my power. But that was in the way, and one thing led to another, and I eventually just walked away from that business and decided that I was going to find my way, what I say, dancing with uncertainty. So that's how it all started. I walked away from my business. I think I did almost $1 million the last year. So that's a big statement. I'm only sharing that number because I think that really illustrates the point that I knew that I was not aligned with that work. And I was very influenced by the work, by the, what's the name of that book? By Eat, Pray, Love, the author of Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh, Liz Gilbert's Big Magic.
Yes. In that, there was one line in that book that really set me free, and it was something about living a life of curiosity, not of fear. And I just walked away from it all. And that began really a journey of getting quiet and really doubling down on a quiet practice so I could hear myself. It took me down various paths until I really got still and stopped trying to tell people what I was doing. I was telling all these great stories. I was doing philanthropic things. I was in a women's prison and in the south of the States. I went to South Africa with my brother. I accompanied Oprah's favorite guest of all time on a book tour. So I did all this stuff that sounded great, but I still wasn't completely aligned until I shed the whole thing. So that's the beginning. I don't know where you want to take this, but I think that mine is probably a 10-year journey of peaks and valleys, of trying to find my voice and grasping and reaching and feeling that something was near me, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. And it culminated with this podcast, which is a story unto itself.
Well, what I love about what you have just shared, because I think it's so helpful for all of us who are on any kind of a journey, whether it's pursuing something creative or not, but this whole notion of being free to try on lots of different things, because it is like a game of warm or colder. And if we enter into a space of that discovery process with an open mind and a playful heart and a kind of I wonder what if will happen kind of energy, then we will be able to see, I think it's better over here. I know it's not that. Like you had that moment at the mastermind. You got up on the second day and you're like, okay, no, it's not that. And what I love about your courage is that you're always when you land on the no, you're very clear. You are like, nope, that's not it. Let me go look over here. And I think
That's a muscle, though, that I think you have to flex. It took me a
totally.
while. I was on the board of a very cool nonprofit, and I was very proud of it. And it took me a long time to get to the realization that I had made my contribution and that I can still support them from in a different way, but I had already given what I was supposed to do there. That was a big lesson for me to realize, oh, I don't have to marry this forever. I've made a contribution. Time to move on.
And see that that willingness to evolve your own thinking with as new information comes to you, I think is such a critical characteristic, a critical trait to embrace. And yes, you had to build that musculature to get to that place.
Mhm.
But I think that as we are all sort of on our own journeys, we can use how we're feeling, whether we are having our energy lifted by the experience or by the interaction, or is it depleting us? That will give us clues
Yeah.
to be able to make the shifts that we need to make.
Can I make a point here? I think it's
Sure.
really relevant. I just recorded an episode on this morning, actually. My podcast is Dear Constance, which is only 5 minutes. So I grab snippets of things. And last night I went to see an amazing play called Pictures from Home. And it's based on a memoir, and it's about a photographer, actually, who was a professor at one of the acclaimed art schools in San Francisco. And he discovered a box in his family's garage that was covered with dust and mice drippings, as he said. And he opened and found a treasure trove of home movies and photographs. And it's a story of 8 years. This is why I'm bringing this up. It was an 8-year project that drove his family crazy. But it was this thing of, he knew that he was onto something, but he couldn't quite, he knew, but he didn't know. And that was this, I thought it beautifully illustrated this dance of trusting yourself and knowing you're onto something, and being tenacious and not holding it, not gripping it too tightly. And he ended up selling the whole project, and it became a book and the whole thing. But it was a beautiful illustration of this thing that we're talking about trusting your knowingness and knowing when to open and close doors without giving up hope or without feeling like you failed. I mean, I felt like I failed a lot, and it was a little bit embarrassing. But that's when it comes full circle to being around people that are in that process, that are feeling their way forward and building their, what you called, your musculature. I don't know how do you say that word? That's critically important.
Yes, and I remember you and I having lots of conversations as I was crawling around in the dark on my hands and knees trying to write my book. And I had many of those moments where I was lost and I had no idea. I knew my concepts were solid, but there were certain chunks where I couldn't connect the threads.
Oh,
And
yes.
that I couldn't find the right through lines, and I couldn't quite articulate how it all hung together. And that is equal parts exciting and completely demoralizing.
Yes.
And so I'm very glad that you brought that up and shared
That's
that
exactly what
story.
happened to me with Dear Constance. I think this is another thing I'd like to say that I think is really important. It's what I call capturing your thoughts. I call it capture your thoughts, craft your idea, and forge your own path. So I was getting these little pings and this knowingness. And the main one was that people were telling me they loved my voice. And who doesn't hate their voice? I mean, I thought that was the strangest thing ever, really. I'm being dead serious. And I'd go back and listen to my message and, okay, maybe my voice isn't that bad. I didn't hate it. I hated my fumbling and mumbling, but I'm like, I was ignoring the fact that multiple people were telling me they liked my voice. Then I started getting messages of people telling me that they loved my messages. See, I'm the kind of person where I really value my morning space and my morning time and my quiet. And when I have something in my head, I just need to get it out. So my trick was, as you know, you've been the recipient of hundreds of them. I drop WhatsApp voice clips. So, hey, Susie, this idea came up. I loved our conversation yesterday. I hope you're well. And this is what my follow-up thought was, so that I can get on with my own shite, right? And so people were telling me they love my voice and they love my messages. And then I finally heard it. I finally got that. It finally got through to me. Like I finally paid attention. That's the quiet practice piece. I sent someone a message and they said, hey, I'd love to listen to you. Would you ever think of doing a podcast? And I said, absolutely not. There are way too many podcasts. The tyranny of choice is shutting me down. No way. And the very next morning I came out of my quiet practice and I said, there was a clue. Look at that violent reaction that I had. And I forced myself immediately to go back and start listening to a couple podcasts. And again, of course, I remembered that listening to podcasts, in my opinion, in my view, reminds me of who I want to be and how I want to walk in the world. So you can listen to mysteries and news, and everybody has different choices. I always listen to things that are around health and wellness and mindset. And authors and the kinds of things that lift me up and remind me who I want to be. And the second I went back, I was like, and that's how I stumbled onto this idea. And the last thing I want to say about this, which I think is what we're getting at here, is that I designed a beautiful, beautiful logo and a beautiful concept based on something near and dear to my heart. It was going to be called Lionhearted, and it was going to shine the light on what I call ordinary people doing extraordinarily kind things. And I just loved this idea, and I was working on it. And little by little, I started to shut down. And I started to get clenchy, and I started to push, and I started to get nervous. And I had drinks one night with my good friend, Susie Moore, and she does a 5-minute podcast every day. And she started telling me that she lives her life in like 3D, and that everything is an idea for her. And she started throwing ideas at me of things that I had said. And I walked out of the restaurant and I said, wow, this is exciting. And I went back and I said, I think this is your language, Susie. I said, I've put the stakes too high on this project called Lionhearted, and it shut me down. Doesn't feel good. I'm going to at least start with something short. I'm going to copy like in the words of, what's the author? Steal like an artist. I'm going to copy Susie Moore's format. So that's how Dear Constance came about. I decided that I needed to trust my instincts. And even though the idea was beautiful, and again, it would be something that I could proudly talk about, I had to go into this idea of saying, I don't know. People would say, so what's the name of your podcast? And I'd say, Dear Constance. And they'd say, oh, that's cool. What's it about? And my stomach would clench. And you're the one, Susie, thanks to you. And I say this really sincerely. You said, and you taught me how to integrate the language, the deliberate language around it, and to say that I didn't know, and that part of the fun was going to be discovering what it wanted to be. And I fully embodied that language. I started telling people that I didn't quite know, that's how I start my daily writing, is with those two words, Dear Constance, and that I was going to bring a beginner's mind and figure it out as I went along. And I kind of I actually really embodied that in my body. I really took that on, and it set me free, quite frankly.
Well, and it's something that listeners can absolutely feel. It translates from where you are seated recording it to wherever in the world we're listening. And it's always a powerful reminder to me. It's something I always tell the students in my Sketchbook Entrepreneur Masterclass, that the energetic state that you bring to the thing that you're creating is exactly what's going to be transmitted. So if you're all hung up, worried about controlling the outcome, or worried about how it's going to turn out, or worried that it's not going to be any good, we're absolutely going to feel all of the above. But if you come charging at it with a playful, bold stance, and you just give it a go, the marks that you make completely reflect all of that.
Well, I really learned that from you, I have to say. I really did learn that from you. And I learned, I became I gained a huge appreciation for quick and dirty. I don't know what you call it. I can't remember what your language is, but it's like the 5 minutes. And that permeated my way of being. And I can see that in retrospect, in the rearview mirror. It wasn't like, oh, let me try that trick in this podcasting realm, but that lesson that I took away, I've done 2 of your courses, that lesson of quick and dirty is better than nothing actually really permeated my life in a lot of ways. I'm also a writer, and I started writing in short form. My creative constraint was 750 words. Then that leaked into, I think, also the Dear Constance. I like the short format, and I really did learn that from you.
Well, and I think, as you were mentioning your first idea for what you wanted to do after your Scout Talent business was working with earlier iterations of yourself. The Sketchbook Entrepreneur Masterclass is my way of not only teaching an earlier version of myself, but a current version of myself, because I have to continue to learn this over and over and over, because it's definitely ingrained in me to cling to that world of logical linear thinking, and all of those ducks better be in a row before you get started. And that's just a kiss of death for your creative expression. I want to turn now to playing around and understanding a little bit more of your artful influences. And you've mentioned the theater already. I also know all of the different kinds of creative adventures that you go on and ways that you feed your soul and your heart and your mind. But talk to us a little bit about the kinds of books and people and poets and music and theater that you regularly infuse yourself with. I call it the inspiration process. You're really breathing it in so that you're regularly topping off the tank of your creative willingness and your sense of possibility, as well as generating new ideas.
Well, I think I really do think that that's different for everyone. And I think the main point and the through line for absolutely everyone, independent of what your work is or what your learning modalities are, it's about switching between the left and the right brain. And that can be as simple as watching a movie, or I play pickleball, for example. So I know when I hit a wall, I need to get out. But anyway, back to your question more specifically. Right now, I mean, I can really only talk about what's really lighting me up right now, and it's definitely the theater. And I'm bringing a different lens to it because I'm looking at how, instead of being all caught in the theme, I'm looking at it as how people are expressing their creativity in scene, or in the script, in the set, in the dialogue, and I'm just bringing different eyes to it. Right now, I'm very excited about the theater. That's for sure one. But like I said, I think even like I write, I listen to podcasts more than ever before because I'm more intentional about shifting on and off within my house. I also learned that from you, Susie. I shift on and off. So I used to just push myself and then say, okay, I can't work anymore. And now what I do is I turn music on, and because I live in a large 1-bedroom apartment and it's beautiful, but sometimes I don't want to go out. I don't want to leave. I need to, and I will shift my energy by turning on music and getting up and changing spaces within my own home. That also is a very inspirational thing for me. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I mean, I have a very rich morning practice. I write and I meditate, and I don't look at my phone first thing in the morning. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm very, very dedicated to it, and I do it every single day, no matter what and no matter where I am in the world. That for me is about hearing my own voice and dot connecting, and hearing my own voice, dot connecting, and noticing recurring thoughts. That's a big one for me. I'd like to also say with Dear Constance, I have no script and I have no plan. And that is part of my creative play. And I say that over and over on the podcast. You know, people always ask me, are you scripted? No, I'm not scripted. And that is intentional because I want to stay in the beginner's mind and I want to stay in the playful. As long as I'm having fun, I'm going to do the podcast. The second I start over planning, I'm out. I'm not willing to do that. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Well, you've answered it beautifully, because you've given us so many different examples of how we can infuse ourselves with new energy, new ideas, new inspiration. And I want to reach out to folks who may be listening to this. If you're in a season of lack or stuck or self-doubt, I do want to encourage you to find those things that bring you alive and connect with those things once again. If you have somehow let those things disappear from your life, reconnect and dive back in. And that is your first opportunity to really step back into your own agency and begin to trust yourself again. And it's a hell of a lot of fun, too. I want to end with one more question for you. I want to see if you can help us understand when we have all of these ideas for a creative project and we're really trying to get at our creative voice. What is it that we really want to say? And then we have this tendency sometimes to make things overly complicated, or we're in a mindset of, oh, it's too challenging for me to figure out. How did you get to that place of finding what was easy? And I know Susie Moore gave you some wonderful advice and inspiration there, but walk us through how you managed to do that.
I think the most important thing is, in the words of David Whyte, even though he didn't intend it this way, the great poet who we both love, I love the language that start close in.
Yes.
And I really sat with that and I said, okay, what is easy? What's going to be the easiest thing I can do? And I'm not quite sure how to answer that, except for that I started with a WhatsApp voice clip. I just, my friend said to me, I want you're in your way. I was on a call with these people telling them, should I do this project or that project? And I was really in my head, and I felt like I had to have a website set up before I started. I was completely caught up in the mechanics, which is classic, right? And I just decided that I was willing to try without knowing. It was really, truly a dance with, let me just start. Let me just try and give myself permission to try it and walk away, because I've done that so many times before. I felt embarrassed that I kept announcing to the world that I was going to do something, then I'd stop or quit. And actually, now that I'm doing something that I love and it is so aligned and so perfect for me, it was good that I shed that, who cares what anybody thinks? That was actually part of the process. I just couldn't see it at the time. So I'm not sure if I've answered you correctly.
No, that's perfect.
I just started. I got the courage. And again, I want to bring this back to surrounding yourself with people that, it's very vulnerable to be in the ring. And when you can try things on for size with people that are aligned in their deliberate and their intentionality around self-expression in whatever form that could be, writing, I don't know. I really found that helped me a lot. And I have a couple of buddies, and you being one of them, where I can just leave a voicemail and they don't have to necessarily respond. It's me hearing myself think out loud. And it's like that thing about just surrounding yourself with people that believe in you and that you trust and can really, fail forward and find your voice with.
Absolutely. I think that the big things for most people are the very things that you just mentioned. Not getting hung up on the mechanics of something, not trying to make something perfect right out of the gate, being willing to let it go if it's not a fit, surrounding yourself with other believing mirrors, people who are going to cheer you on and share their own experiences and their own journeys in a vulnerable state. So you don't feel like you're the only one in the ring who's getting their rear kicked.
Yeah, there's one more thing I want to add there. And I think it's, it's one of the themes of my work, and it's one of the things that I talk about a lot. And it is the unlearning and the rewiring of your operating system. I mean, I worked at Gucci under Tom Ford. And if you put the wrong size dot on an I mean, that's how controlled the image was, and that's how controlled everything was. So I had to a little bit unlearn I wouldn't call it perfectionism, because I'm certainly not a perfectionist, but that fear that I was editing myself every step of the way, over editing. and shooting myself in the foot. So I think that unlearning, or at least examining what has been your MO and your operating system, and where you can revisit some of that, can be very helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And your journaling practice, even if you don't have a sort of classic journaling practice, even if you start to write just for a few minutes a day to get out of your head, and you can start to see the patterns of your thinking, and you can start to spot where the gaps are, and you can start to figure out what the next step is, and you can free yourself from those thoughts that can be on loops.
Do you remember when I called you all those years ago? I mean, this is probably 8 years ago. And I said, Susie, how do you journal? How do you do it? And you were like, oh my gosh, this child is lost.
No.
But it's because I was stuck in the right way.
Yeah.
I was really in doing things the right way. And the thing that the name, to bring this full circle, the name of my podcast, Dear Constance, actually is born out of how I broke into the world of journaling and writing. And it's because I start each entry with Dear Constance. And someone said to me just yesterday, do you remember in the old days we used to write Dear Diary?
Yeah.
Because I would be journaling. I'm like, what am I doing? Who am I writing to? And you say, just keep going, just keep going. But I would stop and start. And a lot of people have the same problem, until I came up with that idea to start with Dear Constance. And it sort of opened the floodgates. So yes, Dear Constance was it was a gift to myself, actually.
And a very powerful nod from the universe, I may add, as to your future path. Well, I want to give you an opportunity to tell folks how to find you. I'm going to put up here on the screen where if folks can subscribe, go find the Dear Constance podcast and subscribe. Yeah. And tell us about the different platforms that it's on.
Thank you. I mean, basically, it's called Dear Constance. It's on every platform, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast, it's available. There's no opt-in or anything like that, because I really started this, and part of my self-talk was that this is a creative endeavor. It's an offering to the world. There is nowhere to sign up. You can subscribe on your favorite platforms. It comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and every episode has been around 6 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. So it's very short, and it's whatever's on my mind, and it's a lot about what we talked about here.
And I can confess that I'm one of the many people who has told Constance over the years that her voice is sonorous and like a cello. And if you want to plug in to a bite-sized morsel of just elegant inspiration and new ways of thinking and observing the world, I cannot recommend it highly enough. You will love it, and it will stay with you throughout the day. I have noticed I'm carrying Constance with me as I go.
Well, thank you, Susie.
Oh, thank you. And before we leave, I want to make a quick announcement. I have a special that I'm running right now for folks who are interested in purchasing a copy of my book, BUOYANT, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Becoming Wildly Successful, Creative, and Free. Whoop, there it is.
Yeah.
If you purchase 3 copies through Amazon and email me your receipt to Susie@innovationcompass.com, we will set up a free business coaching session for you, or it could be a session on anything of your choosing. And that is a $500 value. So it's a wonderful way to get some coaching at a great price. You can gift the extra copies to a friend, and you can also gift the coaching session to a friend if you so desire. So I will put that up on the screen. Constance, any last words you want to share before we sign off?
No, I just love this quote in your book. I'll share that, which I had looked at this morning. How might you open the aperture of who you are, where you need to turn your attention away from others so that you can see what only you can see?
Yeah,
that's the quiet practice.
Oh, well, I love you so much, my friend.
Ditto. Thank you for this.
For
it's been great fun. First time I've ever been live, so it was really fun to do it with my best and most favorite believing mirror.
Your cheerleader.
Thank you, Susie.
Thank you all for being with us today. Take care.